Go.
All right, so thank you all for joining today's session. Basically, the idea behind this particular talk or interactive session or workshop, it's kind of somewhere in between those things, is it's a journey that I've been on over the last couple of years. Started my career as a software developer, moved up as a senior principal, then I worked as a consultant. And one thing that's always been a constant through all of the work I've done is working in groups, needing to work together. Sometimes we're diverging. We're looking to explore and identify product features we can build, different ways we can work together as a team. What should our process be? Should we use story points or not? Sometimes we're converging, as I was touching on there too. How should we design a system? How do we implement some feature in code? So basically, there's always a need to work as a group to discuss possibilities and make decisions. Up until 2 years ago, it had been a very making it up as I go along experience, just organize a meeting, get a bunch of people together and stuff, and just figure things out. I learned some techniques like event storming and off-the-shelf recipes, you can call them. And then I had the chance to work with Dan and Mike, who introduced me to some very different ways of running workshops, some very different ways of thinking about workshops, some great techniques. And so if you're in a situation where you're in a situation and there's not an off-the-shelf solution and not off-the-shelf workshop recipe, and you're like, we've got this challenge, it could be a diverging or converging challenge, and you're like, I need to work with a group of people to make some progress, to discuss an idea, the techniques we're going to talk about today are all aimed around that space. Anything from you, Dan and Mike, to add?
Well, I'm just looking at the flow here, and so we're aware that you can see the red pin. So we're just settling into the session. You've sat down, you've done the check-in question. We find out a little bit about who's in the room and why everyone's here. But we want to do other things today. We want to move on to talking about the process of design, so the conversations that you might have as you approach anything, like a meeting, a workshop, a conference session, something where you're gathering a group of people. What kind of conversations can you use, either just questions with yourself or questions in a group with the co-designers or someone you're working with, to say, what do we want out of this, and are we moving in the right direction towards those outcomes? And then, Nick, you've got some examples and stories.
Yeah, I'm going to be sharing some examples from the last couple of years since I've started working with Dan and Mike, how I've been applying these ideas to my work, some very technical focused workshops, some public workshops, experiences working with private companies, stuff we've done together to try and give you a sense of how it's relevant. But obviously, these are bespoke workshops. You can apply these concepts very differently in your sessions. But a lot of general ideas, I think, will copy across, and some actual specific techniques you can take away.
And for most of you, you should be able to see Mike up in the top corner of the screen there. He can see you because we've got a couple of cameras pointing at the audience. So Mike will be joining in with some of the facilitation. He's also managing any technical issues we've got with the content, because he can manage these Menti slides. And so just listen out for Mike. If you hear an American voice booming in over the speakers, that is where it's coming from. But Mike and I work together a lot, and we met together working on a client that Nick was also involved in. So there's some connections through client work. So as we finish up then, so we do all the stories and we'll finish up here at the end, we're actually giving you a chance, and I know that this is going to matter to a few of you in the room who are doing things today or this week or the next month. Whatever it is you want to work on, we're going to give you a chance to do that today using some of the thinking tools and conversation topics that we introduce. And then we'll check out and we can leave, and you'll get a copy of everything that you've written down today as well. So that's it. If there's anything that you don't want to take part in, just don't do it. We just want people to participate at the level they feel comfortable. So if you're in a small group today, you don't have to join. If you just want to work on your own, that's fine as well. So we're not prescribing any type of interactions. What's this, Nick?
So we've designed this session today, how we would design a session if we were working with a client or a public workshop. And we've got an activity for you as it would appear in one of those sessions. So this is the Ethnographica deck. There are how many about 20 pictures there, maybe 25. And what we'd like you to do right now is look at these images and think about this question over here. So reflect on your personal experience of designing and facilitating workshops or meetings or gathering people, and which one of these images says some things about your experience?
People on the side, if you want to come in, obviously to get a better view of the pictures, go for it.
So have a couple of minutes to think about this and then type your response into Menti, and then we'll move on to the next slide.
And I just dropped the image into the Slack room if people need a better view too.
So where are you in your practice when it comes to delivering workshops or meetings, and which image says something about that?
A few more seconds.
Yeah?
Okay. All right, let's continue, shall we?
Let's go. Is it lost focus again? Let me just click on here. Try again. Shall I advance on here?
Yeah, if you can advance, please, that'd be great, thanks.
Okay.
So, now we want to see your responses. So which of those images did you choose and why? And your response will come up here, so don't post anything you wouldn't want to share publicly.
So yeah, just remember the name of the image or something that describes it, and then just tell us, I chose what because ...
Good responses.
Yeah, thank you to everyone who's sharing already. I chose tricycle because I'm a beginner at workshops. So if you've answered and you're looking at other people's answers, just take a moment to have a look through those, and also just reflect on the experience of that activity. So it's quite a simple visual activity. We'll talk more about that as the session goes on, but what became possible for you as you did that? What happened in your mind to get that answer that might not have happened if you did a different sort of activity?
All right, shall we wait 30 more seconds and then continue? Okay, still a final chance.
These are great. These are great.
So I'll share a bit of my personal experience with this one. We were working with a large Canadian company, and we had to design a meeting for some senior leadership people to reflect on this big program of work they were running. And Dan and Mike proposed using the Ethnographica deck. And I said, you're going to get some of the most senior and expensive people in this company that makes $1 billion of revenue and get them to point at some pictures. I'm like, this is never going to work. But if you guys are running it, I'll happily watch you burn to the ground. But it totally didn't work out that way, and that was a turning point for me when I realized, okay, they're onto something here. There were some different ways of thinking. We got one of I think he was a director of engineering, and he picked out the candles, and he said, my job is to bring light to this project. I want to bring light and keep people happy and motivated and things. And the thing to think about here is, if you didn't use this technique and you did something else, what would you do? Would you get answers like this? I'm a snail because workshops take a lot of time, or I think of a tricycle. It just activates different thinking, different kind of responses, varies your workshop a bit. So again, a very easy technique that can lead to very different results Okay, let's move on. I think we've got a few ideas to talk about first. Clicker's not working, so
There we go.
I'll hand over to you. And, oh,
Here we are then. Right, so you chose an image, you've had a chance to think about what that meant to you, and you've shared something about that. Now just turn to the people around you. Just get together in a group of 2 or 3. You might want to move around the room if you're not positioned well. If you want to, join a group and say something more about your choice. I've got a sand timer here, the lowest tech way of keeping time, but in 2 minutes we'll tell you when to stop. So just move around or turn around to the people behind you. Just say, I chose this because it meant this to me, and just add a bit more to the conversation.
do you have the time?
5-2.
Okay, so we've 15 minutes. Is that on schedule? Or? What's that, sorry?
Can I quickly get behind you?
Yeah, sure, come on. Oh, behind me? Cool, no worries, thanks.
Okay, if you want to bring your conversations to a close, just finish up your conversation. We're going to move on. Heard from the buzz in the room that a lot of people are taking the opportunity to use that small group time. It's good to hear. Well, I think we're going to move on to some theory and some practice around how you could start to use some new techniques in your workshops. These are 16 design aspects. I'm going to ask Mike to talk through what these mean.
Mm-hmm.
So we've
Great.
actually developed, so Mike and I have developed this through all of our work, including the work we've done with Nick. Mike, take us through what this means and how people might use it.
Thanks. Everybody hear me okay? Good? Looks like it. Head nods. Excellent. So, hi, I'm Mike Rozinsky. I'm on the East Coast of the States, just north of Boston. So appreciate being here today and being able to join. And as Dan mentioned, these 16 design aspects come from work that we've done together over the last few years, bringing together a lot of influences and a number of experiences. And we settled on these 16 at the moment, because as you can see, we're versioning. They're evolving, they're adapting. And the way we look at these design aspects is they're a series of conversations you might have with yourself or others that you're co-designing and co-facilitating with that cover the major elements that you want to be mindful of and be aware of and do the work to be ready for your workshop, a presentation, really any kind of meeting. And what we'll do later on today is we're going to focus in the top left-hand corner with the basic information and the framing. As often that's kind of the first stone we might drop in the pond to get things moving. And it's a really non-linear process from there. It's really gravitating towards where your mind's going, where the folks you're working with, where their minds are, and just making sure you're touching on each element here to the depth that's required for what you're trying to achieve. So we'll talk a little bit more about some examples about how we've used some of these and the questions that go along with them as we go. I'll turn it back over to you, Dan, to talk a little bit more about those influences along with our experiences.
Thanks, Mike. So as Mike said, we didn't just pull this out of thin air. It's come from years of work, and certainly, I mean, between the two of us, or three of us, thousands of hours spent working, designing workshops or meetings and gatherings of all sorts. And before all of that, there was all of these influences. And continuing forward now, there's some names here that you might recognize, some which you may not have seen before. Some of these people deal with complexity science, some deal with different ways of working. There's theories, there's models, things that have influenced us in our work. And we continue to gather that stuff. So we stand on the shoulders of these people, really, when we put forward those 16 design aspects. And again, there's more than you can read or we can talk about at this moment, but you'll get a copy of that in the PDF at the end, which we'll post in Slack. Okay, it's story time. Nick, I think we're going to be...
Sure. Yeah, let's jump into the first one.
Okay.
So the first concept, possibly one of the most important and one of the easiest things that you can start doing straight away, is thinking about how you want to start your session in the check-in phase and also the check-out. In my personal career, I've always found the start of meetings and workshops when people try and do things like turn to the person on your left and tell them what you had for dinner last night, or tell us something weird about yourself. Or I've always found that stuff very arm-wavy and fuzzy and hippie, and I didn't really enjoy it, and I thought it's just a waste of time. But since I've worked with Mike and Dan, and I've been paying attention to the check-in phase of a workshop, I think I found it to be really important, and it's something I'm using all of the time now, private work, public workshops. And I think as this slide demonstrates here, you can use that check-in to think about what kind of atmosphere, dynamic do you want to have in the workshop, the way you get people started. Like we did here today, we asked you why you're here. We were just curious to know why you're here, different group, we don't know you. That was the direction we went for. If you go to the next slide, please. The first example I've got is from a public workshop. I think we had 30 people, more than 30 people for a 2-day workshop in person. Hadn't met any of them before. A lot of them didn't know each other either, so I thought, let's go for something fairly general, open-ended. I just want people to share something about themselves. So I asked the question, what's your favorite game? And we got a whole range of responses here. It wasn't particularly on topic. It was more of a general question. And you can see a lot of responses here. We spent about half an hour going through the group, just talking about each person's response and understanding, why is that your favorite game? Oh, in my country, this is a tradition, in someone else's country, or I got this passed down in my family. So already in this 2-day workshop, the first 30 minutes, you're learning about the people around you, building some social connections, learning things about other cultures. A great way to get started. And a lot of things you just won't expect. And some people might agree with experiences you've got. I remember we talked about Monkey Island for quite a while. But yeah, you can continue. Another one, I was working with a company and their domain, this is a bit more on topic this time. So this was a series of workshops for a company who have a domain which is based on meetings, conferences. I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, it was around the topic of meetings, large-scale meetings. And so we used a slightly more on-topic question, again, for the first workshop. Didn't know too much about the people, wanted to see how much they were willing to share about themselves. So we asked, who would you like to meet? Slightly connected to the workshop topic, nothing too deep. As you can see, we got a whole range of responses. Some people went into the past. I'd like to meet Elvis, as long as I don't have to be dead to meet him. So, whole range of responses. Some people very serious, got to learn about other people, how much they're willing to share about themselves. So again, that was a different experience. And if we go to the next slide, this is something that you've put together, right, Dan, when you're thinking about, do you want to talk about this? Or?
Yeah, so we can talk a bit more about the flexibility of the idea of a check-in question or a checkout question. So those things you can use to bookend a meeting of any sort. They're very flexible things, and they can be used for different purposes. And you can see the bottom right here, we've just pulled in the relevant design aspects. So taking you back to that grid of ideas. Why might you use a check-in? To manage a transition in or out of the room. People are walking in. Where are they coming from? Where are they going to? What mood do you want to create? What ideas do you want to put in their head? Settle them into the session. Do you want it to be a check-in that actually gets people connected together? Is it important to you to grow some relatedness or social capital in a group of people? Think about whether they know each other already. Is it important to try and just turn that up a little bit? And then, of course, framing. So we chose one today that did actually set the frame for today's session. It got your minds thinking about what you're about to think about and what you're about to do. So you can use a check-in question to frame. And you can vary the difficulty of a check-in question depending on what you want to achieve. So on this basic sort of matrix, you can see you can use one like nitpicked, what's your favorite game? It's easy to participate in that. Everyone can just pick something and they can participate. It's a low barrier to entry. You could start to ratchet that up if you wanted to actually do some more work. So if you want to get closer to the work, we might turn it right up and say, to you, you could have said to you, why was it important for you to be in this room today? Or what choice did you make by being here and not somewhere else? So there's more power in that question. It invites you to think about change or possibility and the freedom that you had to make that choice.
All right, so this next topic is it's about using different workshop activities to think about the particular problem you're solving or the particular challenge you're facing. And sometimes we, when we're making decisions in our organization, we've got a particular topic, should we keep the monolith or move to microservices? And it can go around in circles, you never make the decision, you get in the meeting, you keep talking about the old conversation again, like you just pick up where you left off last time. And sometimes you want to just we need some different thinking here. We want to just completely approach this topic in a different way. Put all of those old conversations to one side and just get people to look at the problem in a completely different way. And so one of the ways to do that is to go completely the opposite direction. Instead of asking people, what's the best solution here, for example, you ask people, what's the worst possible solution here? What is the absolute worst possible thing we could do to solve this problem? And this is actually one of my favorite things. I tend to be defaulting more towards the stupid check-in questions and the crazy out there activities, but I do have some rhythm behind it. But I do find this really enjoyable. If you go to the next slide, please. Actually, yeah. Do you want to quickly explain what this is doing, and then I'll get to my stories?
Yeah, so, one of the activities that comes to mind here is one of the liberating structures methods called TRIZ, which is where I first saw about how to make use of this thing. So if you invite people to design the worst possible outcome in any given situation, it definitely unlocks some creativity. And it's really fun as well. Like every time you ask a group of people to create the worst possible result, it just breaks a whole load of taboos. Like it makes it possible to talk about things that you're already doing wrong. So you can actually create a list of things that that would be like terrible to produce a particular result or an outcome, and then you can say, which of those things are you already doing? Be honest. And suddenly you've made it possible to talk about bad stuff, and you could even say, which of those things are you going to stop doing? Don't start anything new, which of those things are you going to stop? And because it's fun, people actually come together through that activity. So you've increased the chances of that group wanting to work together again after the activity.
So I've got a couple of examples from one of my workshops. We were asking people to design the worst possible technical strategy for a company. And so everyone will get fired and be replaced with AI robots. There They were going to be on TV. They were going to be burning down the company's headquarters live on BBC TV because all the employees got fired. Kind of like a strike in France, like you see very often on the news. What have we got in here? Yeah, someone's going to outsource a $6 million contract to his brother-in-law who doesn't even work in tech. Yeah, just all kinds of crazy stuff. You know, before we get into the serious stuff, let's just have some fun with this. And there are some things that probably do carry across into a more serious topic. The next one has got one of my favorite quotes. The same topic. What's the worst possible tech strategy? We'll have more microservices than Netflix. That's one of my favorites. But then you get something very serious over here. The team will respond to any fire or incident right away. That's quite a common problem I see in lots of companies. Whenever there's a bug, people switch from what they're working on and immediately fix it. You might get the whole team, 20 devs, all trying to fix this bug or emergency issue in production. And that can have big implications on your WIP, for example, and your blockers. So yeah, some of this will be pure fun and pure silliness, but there might also be some real serious stuff in there. Again, the microservices one actually is quite a relevant point, actually. So basically, when you do this activity, as Dan says, you might see things that you're already doing, and you can also take these ideas and refine them and say, how much would we need to tweak this crazy idea till it's actually a pretty good idea? So if you say to someone, what's the best way to solve this problem? Analysis paralysis, blank sheet of paper. If you say the worst possible thing, you'll get all kinds of crazy ideas. Maybe you can start building on these things. So that's why I'm always a fan of this technique.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
now we talk about questions.
Yeah.
Questions are easy, right? You just say something and put a question mark at the end of it.
Exactly. Just pick a word, what, how, why, write something, and then question mark, and we're done, right? Maybe not.
Let's move on to the next slide. Let's have a look at this example we've got. So we've got two possibilities here. We've got a very simple, you want some information, you can just ask someone the question. I'd like to know your name, what's your name, for example, or I'd like to know what your favorite food is, what's your favorite food? But there are different ways you can phrase questions, and there are different reasons you might want to do that. The first one is just simple variety. Just asking questions gets a bit boring. So you can mix up your normal questions with complete the sentence questions. And what you'll find with complete the sentence is you can shape the way people think and respond a bit more. So it's having a couple of different benefits. So in this example, what will you do when you get back to work after the conference would be the simple standard answer. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're designing a meeting or workshop and every question is a simple question like that, it might be a bit repetitive and boring. This one down here, complete the sentence, is a bit more varied and makes you think a bit differently. So within 3 days of returning to work after NDC London, one thing I should do is, because it will help me to X. You don't have to answer this now, but you can think about that one. So there's all kinds of questions, not just complete the sentence. I think there's some on your website, right? I've written some blog posts about this too, around different kinds of questions, like devil's advocate questions. Yeah, I've got some blog posts, like when I send out the slides later, I'll post a link to some blog posts where there's different kinds of question formats. But the key takeaway is, mixing up your questions using different formats makes your workshops more engaging, it makes your workshops more varied, gets people to think differently, and it's very easy. You can just start with your normal kind of questions and just change the format. And already, if you've added a check-in question, that's interesting, and if you've varied your question formats, already your workshop's going to be much more interesting just with those two things. And you haven't even done the worst possible thing yet, which is the third aspect. Anyways, any words from you on questions?
Just, we could speak all day about questions. So questions are just magic, right? There's so much you can do with questions. There's so much hidden power in the way that you phrase a question. And also, why are you asking a question? Because most of us would assume, particularly if we're in technical roles or in consulting roles, we ask a question to extract an answer, right? Well, not always, because the real powerful questions don't necessarily have clear answers. And the power in the question is actually more in the asking of it than the answering of it, in many cases, with some of the more powerful questions. It's what happens in your mind as you hear the question, you start to think about it. And what happens in your mind as you look at those two is potentially, if anyone has read Thinking Fast and Slow, certainly it was sat on my bookshelf for years before I actually got around to reading it, talks about system 1, system 2 responses in the mind. The second one's a much more of a system 1 type response, right? You just know how to fill those answers much more quickly than you would do the first one. You have to sit and go, oh, I don't know. You've got an open question, you're not quite sure how to finish it. You might not have a very good answer for that, but the second one, you just feel like you can just get the answers more easily. They just come to you much more easily. So think about how to use phrasing, think about how to use sentence stems to get people's minds where you want them to go. Where do you want the flashlight of their attention to go by using questions?
Okay, now we get to the conflict part. Different people have different ideas. We don't always want the loudest voice to be getting their opinion across all the time. So it's important to try and get those differences of opinion visible in a way where people can see what each other thinks and discuss those, and allow the best ideas to emerge, allow people to have a chance to change how they think. So let's look at one way to achieve this. It's what we call inviting dissent. Just want to clarify that the referee's not inviting dissent there. He's probably not too happy to be receiving dissent, but I couldn't find a different image. Any thoughts from you on this one before we get to the example?
No, I don't think so. I'm not a huge football fan, so I'm trying to find more depth in the metaphor there, Nick, but I think you're right. This person there who feels like clearly they want to say something and they've got something on their mind, and maybe they wish they'd been invited to say that thing rather than just having someone hold their hand up to them. But behind Mike's head there, what you can't see is the design aspects we wanted to bring to attention. So inviting dissent is its whole section in the design aspects because we think it's that important, right? Depending on the context, is it important to get people to say, no, I'm not so keen on that, or I don't agree, or I've got a different opinion? What's the value of doing that in a group? And you might find in an organization it has a lot of value. Here, maybe not so much because you're not colleagues in one organization, but in many companies we've worked with, just being able to say no is an incredibly powerful thing, because unless you can actually say no to something, saying yes has no meaning. That's what the power of dissent is. If you can make it okay to say no to something, it's the path towards saying yes. All right, let's get focused again and move on.
Right, so one of the ways you can do this, another question in effect, is using this emotions wheel, similar to the ethnographica deck. You can pose people a question and ask them which one of these emotions they feel most connected to. And it gives people a chance to talk about some anger, sadness, those kind of responses. And what I found with this activity is people having this wheel in front of them, people will choose an emotion that they might not have chosen off the top of their head. It makes them go through these emotions and think more clearly, what is the exact emotion I feel about this topic, getting the nuances to the surface. So that's, again, another simple technique you can introduce into your workshops. Very easy. And the next one is an example of a company we worked with. So the leadership team, they wanted to introduce a new hiring process to be able to hire software engineers 10 times quicker and quickly ramp up their company. They had some interesting ideas, but when we spoke to the teams and the managers at the team level, they had some concerns, but those two groups weren't really talking that well. So we wanted to create this space to allow that dissent to emerge, where the teams could surface their ideas and opinions in a way that management could see it and understand, okay, that's how the teams feel. Maybe we should spend more time thinking about this and maybe make some changes. So we use this metaphor of a mirror, holding a mirror up to the leadership. We had a remote workshop, and we had a questionnaire in the workshop which was anonymous, sorry, not unanimous, definitely not unanimous. It was very anonymous. So people could share their responses in a safe way that management would see, and people were able to identify themselves if they wanted to when we went into the discussion, and if they chose not to, that was also fine. And then we changed the color, so people got to vote from 1 to 5 how much they agree with a particular idea and what concerns they might have. So 5 was good, that's the greens. 3 and 4 is orange. It's kind of like, yeah, we think that's a potentially a good idea, but some concerns. And then 1 and 2 is red. Not too many of those, but a couple in the key areas. And that might be important enough that, that's something to focus on. We've even got a 1 down here as well. So, yeah, that worked really well. We got these things surfaced. There were some productive conversations. But if we go to the next slides, the leadership team weren't ready to receive all of that dissent. We had a great workshop and lots of productive conversations, but then the program manager said to us, he said, me, Mike, and Dan, we were kind of in trouble. He said, that should never happen again. He said, whenever we go to the workshop, always has to be 5 and green. Every idea management has to be unanimously approved and well accepted by the whole team. So he wasn't ready to invite dissent, and this was a real shock for him. So I guess one of the first points is, if you're going to do something like this, think about how certain people might take it if it's their idea that's receiving dissent. But the thing is, over the next few weeks and months, this person kind of reflected on that experience, and we had more sessions with him, and he was more open to accepting dissent afterwards. So kind of like planting a seed. Some of these ideas might have an initial reaction, but over time, you build that culture where inviting dissent is more widely accepted.
Yeah, sorry. When you have these sessions where management has difficulty to listen to the dissent, how is the ratio between the workshops that you have with the team where you try to enable dissent and actual training, coaching the management one-on-one to prepare them for accepting dissent?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot we could say about that, so we'll come back to that at the end of today's session. But a great question. Thank you for raising that.
Yeah, there's a question there about how to work with management in dissent. If you've got other questions, we'll put them in the Slack channel and we'll answer them all at the end, or just as you think of them, just drop them in Slack and we'll try and answer them all at the end. Also, we'll be here after the session or just outside. So.
Just one final thing I would add on this one is we had a lot of people after the workshop who we hadn't even met before who were involved in this, and they came to us and said, we enjoyed that workshop, we got to express our points of view. It wasn't just the company, there were other agencies involved who wanted to get their thoughts in as well, and they were the people who came to us the most. So yeah, a lot of people appreciated that, and some...
So it usually works, it's just that not everyone's happy with the results, depending on the level of fear in the culture.
And again, before we got to that point, we had a check-in question and a couple of activities before that led up to the dissent. We didn't go straight into the dissent. We designed that sequence of steps to get to this point.
Yeah. So, we're going to invite you to dissent on all the things we've talked about. Which of the things that we've just said, which of those practices, so you've got the five areas of practice there that we've just shared with you, which ones are you least likely to use? Which ones are real thumbs down for you? So you've got setting the mood with thoughtful check-ins, bringing creative thinking in, the art of questions, embracing difference, or I'm not sure. So anyone who came in right at the end may not have used Menti yet, and we can see the results coming up now. So take a moment to think. We'll stop on this slide for a few moments, and we'll see where the room's at.
Dan, these should all be 5s. Whenever we get to this point, these should all be 5s and green.
Yeah, we need to cover this up in case the executive team walk in for this conference and we're revealed to be very poor program managers. Thank you for your responses. This is great. So it looks like the winner at the moment, setting the mood with thoughtful check-ins, is something that people aren't really feeling is necessarily the thing for them. That's interesting. And other people aren't sure. So we'll just give you a few more minutes. Looks like we've got most people there probably from the room. Thanks for your answers. So the winner there is the check-ins. Looks like most people are thinking, can't see how that's going to work for me. So thanks for sharing that. Again, it's something we can talk about after session or on Slack.
Yeah, definitely. After the session, if you've got any questions or ideas about this, we're always happy to chat. So don't feel...
Why did you pick the thing you just chose? Can we find out a little bit more about that? Would you be willing to share a bit more? So I am least likely to use the practice of blank because what? So just stay in Menti for a second. And again, just like at the beginning, anything you answer is going to appear on the screen. So if you're not happy to share it, please don't. Why are you least likely to choose that thing? Okay, so some awkwardness perhaps. Okay, some people are just picking one that's maybe the worst of a good bunch. Okay, good.
This is basically what I was saying earlier. This is when I did like check-ins, that forced happiness, that forced fun.
Yeah.
It feels so fake and artificial. Totally agree on that one.
Yeah. So possibly some risk in it then.
Yeah.
People feeling like, oh, that's gonna expose. There's some vulnerability in that. If you ask people to do that right out the gate, you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to make sure that was a good question, and it's actually going to do the work you want it to do as people arrive. Doesn't add value potentially. So these are some great answers. Thank you for everyone who's sharing these.
I think those points about check-ins, there's a lot of, I agree a lot of that. If you're bringing a group of people together who know each other, then treating them like a group of strangers and asking weird questions, yeah, it might be a waste of time. But also, yeah, we always like to do it, don't we? We always find there's something new and interesting that comes out in all of our sessions, even with the same group of people.
Yeah, I think it certainly comes with experience. It feels natural to me and to Mike, definitely, and you now as well, Nick, but it doesn't always, especially when, as I've said, you're putting in a position where you'd rather not be vulnerable at that point as a facilitator or a presenter, perhaps in a session. So we'll capture all of these. They'll be exported at the end. If you're still answering, just to give you one more moment. Okay, we're going to move on.
Yeah, and something to add just on the check-ins too is that it's often people transitioning from something, and even where there are deep relationships, it kind of forces some creativity to get to know each other a little bit better and just get into the space of doing work together. But I certainly appreciate all these comments too. It is a practice that evolves for sure.
Okay. So we're going to quickly get through this and then on to the section where you actually get to do a little bit of work about whatever it is you're thinking about. So again, we'll go back to Ethnographica deck. What's the invitation, Nick?
So we're kind of reflecting on that first question we had from a different perspective now. So where is it you want to get to in your workshop design and facilitation practice? So again, pick an image which talks to you about that topic.
So you know where you were, you pick the image at the beginning, where would you like to get to? And which image says something about that? Okay. So just quickly give us an answer on that. If you'd like to share that, what image did you choose and why? I chose what? Because? Where do you want to get to in your practice? Okay. Okay, thanks to the folks who've responded. So again, just If you've answered, have a look through what other people are saying. Get a feel for who else is in the group here, and maybe people you're going to see at the end of the session or the rest of the day, and you see, you can see who's in this group today and what kind of things people are aiming for. Maybe it will come up in conversation. Okay. Should we move on, Nick, to the closing part? Right. So, thanks for participating this far. Thanks for staying with us. At this point, we're inviting you now to think about some of the things you've been playing with today. We're going to bring you back to those design aspects, so the 16 topics, the 16 conversations. As Mike said, we always start sort of top left, and we've got basic environment and framing. So whatever you're working towards, you're in here for a reason. What is it you want to get better at? Is it a meeting that's coming up, something you're doing today, something you're doing next week? We've got some questions to help you think about that. Everything, as I said, that you write down, you'll remember what you said, and we'll anonymously put that in the PDF, so you'll have those notes. The first question for basic environment is, how much time do you have? So just, again, go to Menti, start answering these questions. Think about what it is you're working towards. How much time do you have for that session, that workshop, that meeting? You're going to build up a picture of like the basic information for this workshop or this meeting, whatever it is you're doing. Okay, so 1 hour is definitely the winner. 1 hour is the sweet spot for this group. That's great. Okay. Okay, so it looks like a lot of people in that 60-minute area. A lot you can do with 60 minutes. But you're also constrained in other ways as well. So that'll be something you're thinking about. What can I realistically do at that time? Next question, how many people will there be? What's the size of the group you're working with in this thing? Okay. Okay, really strongly weighted there towards, I think we see some strong signals on the area that people in. 60-minute meetings, under 20 people. Okay, so keep those in mind. Where will everyone be? Are they going to be in person, virtual, all virtual, or some mixture in hybrid, or something else? You're inventing some other form of hybrid.
Wasn't expecting to see that many hybrid. Interesting.
Yeah. So you're starting to build up that list of basic information about what you're designing for. What do the things you know about your gathering enable you to do, and what do they constrain you in? What sort of other things are going to come to mind for you soon? Okay. And then finally, we move on to framing. I hope everyone can read that. Nick, do you want to invite people to do some framing?
Yeah, sure. So what are some things you know about the people who will be in your workshop? What about the things, you might not be able to share private details about your company, but what feels relevant to the workshop you're designing about those people? Personalities, ways of working, things they might find, issues they might find difficult to overcome, that kind of stuff.
What kind of identities might you have in the room?
Thinking about different power dynamics, for example. How long have they worked at the company? You've got a lot of new employees or a few people who've been there for a very long time.
Yeah.
Is it a topic you've been talking about a lot of already, and people are kind of bored from it and worn out from it, or is it something new and interesting you're trying to get started and start building momentum?
Thank you for sharing these answers. This is great. So you can start to see where the group is in terms of what's on your mind. You know something about who's turning up to your thing. What do you know about them? And as you think about those things you know about that group, what is it going to mean for you? What kind of questions might you end up using in different parts of the session? What kind of level of altitude? Is it going to be way high up here? Is it going to be working with management? Do you need to be somewhere in the middle? Are you going to be going right down into the content of something? What sort of activities are going to feel right to you? Okay.
Something else I would always think about in this one as well is how busy are people? Will they be able to... I was looking at this one about the short attention spans, and that's actually a very common scenario. People are so busy with their work, they've got deadlines that when you're organizing a meeting or a workshop, that's just another block in their calendar to try and get through as quickly as possible. So that's a great one, actually, short attention spans.
Yeah. And if you're dealing with something like that, what might you choose to do in the session to actually break that up? Maybe you'll actually have a moment's pause to say, just stop and think on your own for a minute. For the first time today, you've just gone from one meeting to the next. Stop and think about what you want to say next. Make some notes in silence on your own in this meeting, and then we'll carry on. Incredibly powerful in an environment where people are just bang, 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 one meeting next. You just turn up, you start talking. You're listening to people, and you never stop to think about anything on your own. Just use individual thinking time. Okay. So you've made a pretty good picture now of the who's going to be in the room, where they're going to be, how long you have. You've got some constraints and some possibilities. What are you actually going to be aiming for? And we've got 4 questions now to help you frame it. This is the story around your meeting, your workshop, whatever it is. The first one is this: wouldn't it be great if you were going to complete that sentence as you think about whatever it is you're working towards? How would you complete that sentence? I like these already. We can hear everyone. We can hear every voice. Okay, so we've definitely got a sense of people looking for some inclusivity in some of the people in this room. What the things they're working towards is having everybody to have a voice, being engaged, being part of it.
Yeah, fun. That's one of my favorites. That's why I'm always into the worst possible. So yeah, that might be a relevant one for you. If you're thinking about how to make it more fun, you could start with the worst possible.
Okay.
But there is a risk that worst possible can go wrong sometimes, so it is important to be careful with that.
I'm going to move on to the next one now because we've got these other ones to get through. So the next question was, the most important part is, if you had to pick one thing, what's the most important part of what you're designing? Thank you again for these answers. I love some of these. People should feel safe to disagree. Okay. So the next framing question is this: what I'm most worried about is, what could go wrong? What is it that you're feeling inside you that's like, oh, I wish that wouldn't, you know, what could go wrong for you? Okay. Time wasted, people not engaging, switching off. And as you sit with those worries, what might that mean? Like, as you begin to get into more of the design, what might you bring into that 60 minutes with those 20 people to reduce the chances of those things happening? Okay, we've got one more sentence, so thank you for these. I'd love to sit for a bit longer and let you think about these, but we want to make sure that we've had a chance to answer all the questions. So to finish then, to help you frame your thing, whatever it is you're working towards, by the end, I hope most people feel what? Optimism, being heard, making progress. Okay, thank you for all these. These are great answers. Okay. So, can we do a time check? When does the session end? How long have we got? We're done? Yes. Okay. Well, now it's small group time. Okay. Maybe we can take this outside the room, but the next invitation is to work in small groups. Take the answers that you just had. We're going to collect those up. We'll export them from Menti, and we'll put them into... what we're going to do is put them into Slack, and maybe just before we leave, we'll just quickly answer this one. So just as you're walking out now, and we're wrapping up, which of the things that we mentioned seem important next now to you? So you've answered those questions, and you've had a chance to think about your framing. What seems important next? Where's your mind going in those 16 things? We'll just quickly capture that as we finish. It's fascinating to see where, in this group of people, where are people's minds going to next? What seems important to think about now? And notice the things that hardly anyone's thinking about. What's going to happen before and after your session? You get to the end and everyone wants to feel heard, and they're like, well, what happens next to all this stuff we just collected? I don't know. Oh, sounds like every other workshop we've done. It's just going to get all those Post-its and put them in the bin. So have a think about what happens before and after, and how you're going to communicate. What are you going to do next? Thank you for these answers. I think we're over time now, but thank you very much for everything you've contributed today. Nick, anything else to say?
No, just thank you. Hope you enjoyed it. I've been on a learning journey myself over the last few years, learning to apply these techniques differently to my workshops, and I hope that this can be a seed that grows into a nice plant for you over the next few years as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.